if there's going to be any serious rapprochement between the United Kingdom and the European Union, that's got to be on an institutional and lasting basis. And that's something which I suspect Starmer, like many British politicians, is reluctant to envisage. But I think he may come to understand that there's no alternative.
Hello, I'm John Stevens. I'm the chair of the Federal Trust, and I'm talking once again to Brendan Donnelly, the director of the Federal Trust, about developments in the UK relating to Brexit. Brendan, we are now in a pre-election period in the UK, and the focus is on Keir Starmer, who it looks very likely will be the next Prime Minister. Pro-Europeans are somewhat concerned that he has been so cautious on the European question up until now and seems to be very determined to stick to that. Why is this, do you think?
Well, I think he has a plan, and I think that Rishi Sunak spends a lot of time telling us he has a plan, but Starmer has an electoral plan, which is that he will win, and he hopes now to win with very substantial majority, largely by reassuring those people who in the past were hesitant about a Labour government, the prospect of a Labour government. An important element of that reassuring rhetoric that he's employing is on Europe. No to rejoining, no to the single market, no to the customs union. Now, there is a view which says that he's taken this too far and it may even be counterproductive. But it's his plan and he's sticking with it. And there is a logic to it, but it's a logic which I think will create problems for him once he is elected to government.
But do you think that pro-Europeans can be comforted to any degree by the thought that the larger the majority is that Starmer is able to achieve over the Conservatives, and if the Conservatives suffer a truly crushing defeat, as may indeed be the case, that this will give him a greater room for manoeuvre in government on the European question and indeed on all other questions?
Yes, I think it may. But I think it'll be a couple of years before he's able to take advantage of that potential flexibility. I think he's boxed himself in to such an extent, but for the next couple of years at least, he's going to have to confine himself simply to smiling nicely at the Europeans and hoping that will create a set of short-term victories for the Labour Party in its European relations, which I don't think will be achievable. It's interesting that Labour government or the potential Labour government, Labour Party, used to talk about renegotiating the trade and cooperation agreement. They've given that up because they realise that's not a realistic prospect. I suspect, however, that in a couple of years' time, the mixture of public opinion turning even further against Brexit and the continuing economic problems of the country may create pressure on Starmer to have a more accommodating and a more, in my view, realistic view of relations with the European Union. But he is boxing himself into a corner in a way that, however big his majority in the short term, he won't be able to evade or escape from immediately.
How reliant will he be on a shift in public opinion, given the fact that he won't be apparently doing very much to guide that public opinion?
Well, it is an extraordinary thing about Brexit and the developments over the past 8 years that without leading political guidance from the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats or anybody really, public opinion has spontaneously moved in the direction that it has. And with the queues, which will inevitably be increasing with the greater formalities for imports, I just can't see that public opinion won't continue in that direction yet further.
Will he also be relying on disarray in the opposition on this question, particularly if the Conservative Party moves, as many believe it will, to the right in having lost the election and take a more strongly anti-European stance? Will this be a limitation?
Well, I think that may be an encouragement for him. He may conclude, he may see, because it's manifest, that the Conservative Party can't provide any effective opposition on Europe or anything else, and that will create opportunities for him. It'll be up to him to decide whether he takes those opportunities or not. And I think that's a rather unresolved question of British politics over the next 5 years.
What about Starmer's own personal commitment to the European issue as a significant part of his political program. He does seem to be someone with an almost limitless capacity for flexibility. I mean, the defection of this lady from the Conservatives, Miss Elphick, seems to be rather a curious example of this. So someone who one would not have thought would be a natural move from the Conservatives to the Labour Party, and yet Starmer has taken her on board without so much as a qualm.
Well, it is possible to take comfort from that there's a sort of ruthless pragmatism about him, that if in 2 years' time the mixture of developing public opinion and economic mediocrity, economic stagnation forces upon him a volte-face, then he'll be able to do it, advocate that he is, with less inhibitions and less reservations, that somebody whose commitment to a particular political philosophy was different and more pronounced than Starmer's.
And will his position of power inside the Labour Party, having won such a significant victory, be such that he will be able to take his party with him, that he won't have any internal opposition to a more pro-European line?
I think that's right. I think his grip on the machine of the Labour Party is very, very strong indeed. And I think he'll be going with the flow of the Labour membership, because there has been pressure, not as much as I would have liked, on him from within the Labour Party to adopt a more pro-EU stance. He'll be going with the current, if in 2 or 3 years' time he attempts to adopt and does adopt a more pro-EU stance.
What about the EU's position on this? There was some commentary recently that the Labour Party would spend its first term in office getting to hate the EU because it would not be able to get the concessions that it was hoping for and not have the welcoming hand that it was feeling entitled to. Where does the EU stand? And in particular, where do you think they would be regarding a UK application to rejoin, for example, the single market or the customs union?
It is a possible outcome that the Labour Party in 5 years' time would be resentful, simply resentful of the EU's refusal to accept as hard currency smiles and warm words. But it needn't work out that way. What I'm hypothesizing is that halfway through through the future Starmer government, there will be some sort of volte-face, some sort of change of mind. The recognition that simply smiling sweetly is not going to cut it with the European Union. The European Union is in its external relations a much more hard-headed actor than sometimes people in this country understand. I'm not sure, and I don't think the European Union is sure, what its reaction would be to an application to join the single market, however that was phrased. There would certainly be people within the European Union who said we mustn't allow the British to cherry pick. And there would be certainly people within the European Union who said, is there any point in having a protracted negotiation with the British on this subject, only for them to be whipped out of the single market or customs union or whatever it was by the next Conservative government? I think there's an interaction between internal British politics and the reaction that we'd get from the European Union to any attempts institutionally to come closer. I think one thing that the European Union will want in its from a Labour government in future is that if there's going to be any serious rapprochement between the United Kingdom and the European Union, that's got to be on an institutional and lasting basis. And that's something which I suspect Starmer, like many British politicians, is reluctant to envisage. But I think he may come to understand that there's no alternative. And public opinion may come to understand in this country that there's no alternative.
But even with public opinion moving strongly towards the position that Brexit was a mistake, an application to join the single market without going further, being therefore a rule taker, is quite a hurdle for British public opinion, one would have thought, especially if there hasn't been any real preparatory work in engaging with public opinion on the European issue in general and on that specific proposition.
That's absolutely true. But if you had a government with a formidable advocate, which he can be when he wants to be, in Starmer, of reversing Brexit, of correcting the mistake that has been made under the influence of and carelessness of a Conservative government, then I think that is a change of opinion that could come about. In 2016, the Conservative government, which in theory was in favour of remaining in the European Union, had the problem that it had spent 6 years decrying everything about the European Union. If you have a government which is consistently and enthusiastically pointing policy in a particular direction, it is possible to go with the flow of public opinion and make important changes, not overnight, but over a period of time of, say, a year or 18 months. I don't think that's an impossible hurdle to overcome. If the question of being a rule taker within the European Union is taken in isolation, then of course it's a problem, which is why I think that thinking about joining the single current market or customs union without regarding it as a prelude to rejoining fully the European Union makes very little political or economic sense.
So you would see that it would be necessary for the government, the UK government, to present single market and customs union membership as a step towards fully rejoining.
Yes, and I think that's a coherent case that can be made. And that finesses the problems about being a rule taker, because you're not going to be a rule taker indefinitely. The thought that we can get back into the European Union through the back door of the single market, I think, is to repeat the errors of the first 15 years of this century. That somehow you can become a member of the European Union, a full member of the European Union by stealth. It hasn't worked. It didn't work in 2016, and I think that there is justice in the claim that some of the people who advocated or even still advocate British membership of the European Union aren't on the level with the electorate about the sovereignty sharing and institutional implications of all that.
But is it not clear that to fully rejoin the EU, the UK would now obviously not have the opt-outs it previously enjoyed and would have to be committed to joining the Euro and Schengen at the very least?
Yes, and I think that if you had a government that was making the case for those things, particularly on Schengen, and particularly with the difficulties that are increasingly facing British travellers to continental Europe, that wouldn't be an impossible sell. Of course, if you present it in terms of we have to give up the pound, we have to give up our passports, we have to give up this, that, and the other, then that's not the way in which you're going to win the electorate over. But if you can spend a period of time at a governmental level with all the resources of government making the case for being in the Euro, making the case for being in Schengen, then I don't think either of those things are impossible to convince the electorate of. One important point about rejoining and the prospect of rejoining is that our European partners will want to be convinced that this isn't going to be undone in 5 years' time by a Conservative government. So it will be important how British politics develop for the prospect of rejoining, and not insisting on opt-outs of single currency of Schengen will be a sign of good faith to our community partners, to our European partners, that this time we're serious about being in the European Union. And of course, practically and pragmatically, being in the Euro in particular makes it much more difficult to unpick European membership, EU membership in future.
But this requires an enormous amount of bandwidth for a government to undertake. And one of the curious phenomena at the moment is that we have this very significant shift of public opinion against Brexit. And yet Europe and Brexit does not feature very highly in the list of concerns that people have, certainly ahead of the general election. They're thinking about the economy, they're thinking about the cost of living, the National Health Service, immigration. Now, of course, all these issues have a European dimension, a very significant one. And yet, the European question is submerged by these other questions. Might not a Labour government wrestling with these issues, wrestling with the economy, wrestling with the cost of living, housing, and the rest, still be so focused on that level that they're unable to make the further step of linking it to a program of rejoining the EU? Or will they actually find a program for rejoining the EU a way of creating a general narrative for their tackling of those issues, one that is obviously superior to whatever is being offered at the time by what is constituting the opposition?
Well, that's the optimistic analysis, and I don't think by any means it's impossible. I come back to the point that when you have all the resources of government, a particular government which will be politically dominant, as the Labour Party seems likely to be for the next 5 years, arguing a particular case and a particular coherent and narrative-driven case, then I think public opinion can be shifted. And in this case, it wouldn't so much be shifted as complemented, as filled in, as consolidated. If there is profound and growing antagonism to Brexit, then that seems to me a rather ripe field, a rather fertile field on which the Labour Party and the Labour government could scatter its rhetoric about not just rhetoric, its analysis about the way in which rejoining the EU, becoming more economically associated with the EU, would be a major contribution to solving all these problems.
So in conclusion, you would say that it is possible to envisage at the next general election, the one after this, a Labour government effectively advocating rejoining the European Union. That is not a fantastical proposition. It is actually one in which pro-Europeans could take some comfort.
Yes, I think it is a possibility. 50-50, 60-40, who knows? But it's certainly not so far from reality that those who want to rejoin the European Union should give up in despair and say, well, we're never going to achieve it. It is something that's on the cards. And it's something that the Labour government is much more likely to do if people begin to say, we will not vote for a Labour Party that doesn't go down this road. At the moment, the Labour Party think, and probably rightly, that they can largely get away with offending those people who want to rejoin the European Union. Over the next 5 years, it will be very interesting to see whether political forces that want to rejoin the European Union are able to mobilize and put pressure on the Labour Party in a way that they certainly haven't until now. And some of them, in my view, don't realise how important and urgent it will be to put that pressure on the Labour Party if it does get into government. I think from day one, those who want to rejoin the European Union have an opportunity to put pressure on the Labour Party, but it will require pressure, it will require insistence, and there'll be a temptation to say the Labour government know what they're doing. I think under the pressure of events, they may well swivel in a more pro-rejoin direction, but it will be the pressure of events combined with increasing public political pressure on them as well.
I think that's a very good place to conclude, Brendan. Let's hope that the Federal Trust can play a part in putting that pressure on a future Labour government. Many thanks, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll follow our others on the same topic.
Thanks very much.